Well, everybody, we are here with our serious guest for the week. It's awesome to have her. On a non serious topic, I was thinking about a funny thing that we could address, which is that we both have names that people could pronounce in different ways. And so I wanted to touch base with you and see how you wanted your name to be pronounced.
Ooh, Andrea.
There you go. So, everybody, this is
Oh,
Andrea Martinez, my guest for the week. She's an awesome human being that I've gotten to touch base with a whole bunch and run some events with and watch her do some amazing work coordinating, at this point, several different co ops, I'd say, in San Francisco and around the Bay Area and connecting them with each other and helping develop a whole bunch of tools and resources that people going through a pretty unique experience, which is communal life in a smaller environment, have to pick up. And so I wanted to bring her on to have some cool perspective on life in San Francisco and co-op living. So I think one of the things that a lot of people bring up a lot of times, Andrea, is that there's an element of San Francisco that seems very interesting. And co-op life oftentimes comes up in conversation for me because somebody will mention rent disparity, income inequality, how San Francisco is the epitome of privileged hypocrisy because it talks a lot about these very large, broad social issues and acts as kind of a bellwether for a lot of social topics and topics around the environment and that sort of thing, while at the same time seemingly demonstrating the worst inequality imaginable to man by having a terrible homelessness issue and a serious income inequality that is building up in the city. And so I oftentimes bring up your experience and co-ops in general as a kind of alternative model that people don't usually talk about or see a lot in this conversation. So, how many co-ops would you say exist in the Bay Area at this point?
and including South Bay and East Bay, there's got to be at least 200 to 1,000, I would guess.
See, I think that's a
There's a
number.
lot.
Yeah, that's a number that would shock a lot of people. And so why don't you could you describe for me like a spectrum of the kinds of housing we're talking about and the kinds of experiences people might have in terms of like numbers and yeah, just the kind of places people might live in, that sort of thing?
Yeah, super varied. Um, there's been some intentional communities started on docked boats, and there's been Bus Patch, which was um, a set of communities. Actually, one of them was a converted minibus. Um, And then there's I live at Embassy, which is like a large mansion with a bowling alley. Um, there's some folks who are just converting like a regular house, a regular 4 bedroom, putting in a couple doubles, and they have 6 people living there together. The experiences are quite varied. There's some people like the archive living together and are a lot more a lot of them are in tech, and they specifically are structuring communal living to facilitate being able to work more. There's artist co-ops where, very different backgrounds. Financial models are extremely different. Some of them specifically, especially larger houses, sometimes like ours, can actually offer very different pricing points for rooms within the house, which is a wonderful way for people of different income levels to actually be able to live together and share food and actually have the same experience outside of the bedroom. Actually, if you think of a house, the common area is the grand part of it. So what bedroom you're in matters uh, significantly less. And then there's now starting to be some houses where there's like multiple units and they share a backyard, and the hope is to be intergenerational and for some people to have kids. That's been a really new fun discussion. There's one of those in the East Bay now that just got started where they actively, purchase the property, and so they can modify it a lot more. So yeah, I think they're all very different. Some of them are consensus based. Some of them are duocratic, or have more anarchist leanings.
What are
I
those
would say a
for the
lot share food and share meals.
for the less versed in some of those terms? Can you explain consensus based versus duocratic versus
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Consensus based, and you can have a mix of these, depending on kind of what type of decision you're making. But consensus based would be communities that, for instance, probably are meeting about once a week or once every 2 weeks, and any major decision everyone has to agree to. Everyone has to give it an okay. Um, um, Duocracy is something that has been used a lot, I think, in the SF ones. Embassy follows duocracy, which is as long as the decision is reversible, then anyone can go ahead, just announce on Slack that that's what you want to do, give people some time to dissent. So you're actually making sure that there's not anyone dissenting instead of trying to wrangle everyone's consent.
Hmm.
And as long as it's reversible, you can go ahead and do it. And people generally try to be okay with decisions that they would have done differently, acknowledging that, like, if you're not one of the ones helping to implement the change, then actually just getting it done matters more than having everyone be in accord about how it's done.
Huh.
So it's a bit more action oriented.
Mm-hmm.
And even in that model, we are consensus based for adding new members to our house. For that decision, we decided we actually have like a little constitution governance system,
Okay.
that for that we need consensus. So there's also like hybrids and things like that.
That's really, really cool. Yeah, I think um, for a lot of people outside of the Bay Area or outside of an area that has visibility for this topic, I think a lot of people still have a kind of like a wanderlust or like similar type movie about like commune living in the 60s or the 70s, or still have a vision of like a bunch of hippies running around just like everybody does what they want, man. And or the flip side of that, which is like some giant impossible to navigate system where you're not actually allowed to do anything because everyone has to agree to every
Totally.
single decision made. And so I think it's really interesting for a lot of people to hear about that spectrum of possibilities. And I know that Hate Street Commons, for example, is something that you guys have done, which is just kind of a consortium of various co-ops. Is that a decent way of describing it?
Yeah, I think it got started actually with Zarina kind of realizing um, there's a lot of similar pain points that all the houses hit. So buying and sharing food, sharing finances, to buy food. So what food do you buy?
Mhm.
Um, People are often shocked that we share food, but actually, like in your home family with your siblings, your parents would buy food for you and then you would all share it. It's actually quite, I think, the common experience. Recruiting. So, like, how do you choose new people to live in your house? Um, there's similar emotional pain points that we've noticed a lot of the houses hit, like breakups in community when two housemates are dating and one of them breaks up. Um, and recently, legal struggles, actually. San Francisco, more than 6 people unrelated by blood should not be living together. So we've had to fight the definition of a family.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, through seeing kind of these similar pain points, we realize like actually we're a lot more powerful. We start to coordinate. I think long term it makes sense for us to coordinate, to have some kind of like legal sway in San Francisco,
Hmm.
and a lot of projects can be made kind of together. So one of them is like the co-op crawl. We realized a lot of people want to join the co-op scene. They don't know what co-op is, right? they're all quite different. So you're kind of like choosing what vibe you're going for. There's no right answer about like the best co-op. Um, so the co-op crawl was started so people could kind of like sample and go through a little party of multiple. Um, a centralized application for recruiting was started. And most recently, there's been a working group around how do we facilitate communities being able to house unhoused people when we have spare bedrooms. Um, yeah, it's been pretty helpful to realize like, oh, our house is arguing about X and Y. How did that other house handle it? Or how do we want to do our finances? Like, do we want to do an LLC or whatever? And getting to ask everyone else who's also, going through the same thing has been very helpful.
Yeah, and you touched a little bit on this just now, but I've also found that um, the co-ops are really good at, like we were discussing, that balance between individualism and communal life, and not just seeing communal life as that immediate house, but how that house can impact the larger community around it, be that other co-ops or be that the city itself, the neighborhood. And so I know that there's a lot of projects that you guys have been able to like pull resources together that somebody in a different living situation might sit around with one or two friends and be like, wouldn't it be cool if we could help out the homelessness issue by like offsetting rent prices by doing this thing and like doing this other thing? But you guys actually have enough people and this duocracy mentality at times of like, let's see if we can do it. And so, what are some projects that you feel particularly proud of, or that you really think, co-op living was able to make more of an impact on than you might have been able to make otherwise, possibly?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think something that the embassy has realized, and this house was started multiple years before I joined it, was that it's actually quite radical just to have a commons, just to have a space where people can meet for free. Um, and That's actually how Second Life, or some formerly incarcerated folks, started joining to play Dungeons and Dragons, actually, at the house. And it really was just like needing a space. And then there started to be salons. Like, we were like, oh my God, there's like really intelligent people in our community. And like, I would love to keep learning. I left college and I was like, I miss, lectures and continuing to learn. Why don't we just have that person give a talk in our living room? Why not? So actually, I think one has been realizing that if you have these bigger houses and you have these common areas, you can actually, like, they themselves can be containers. And kind of to your point about the community isn't just the people who live in it. We actually have a lot of people just visit, or like who feel a part of the community, even though they're not permanently residing there. Um, and Yeah, I think Second Life, had the benefit of being able to start two houses, and that was people in the community scene saying like, yes, we need intentional community for people leaving incarceration. Incarceration is like the antithesis of community. It's like anti-communal living. But if you try to rent a house, they do background checks. And so if you're convicted of murder, the chances of getting a house have just, I mean, we've tried so hard to get a house, and it's extremely difficult. And actually, it was through the community network that the two houses that were actually found and able to be used were figured out. And Second Life has just been amazing. I mean, the guys help us a lot with restorative justice. So I'd say alternative justice has been another great one. I think when you live with people, when you don't live with people, you get into an argument, it's fine. You like can kind of ghost, or I mean, you shouldn't ghost, but you can ghost. When you live with them, you can't. Um, and everyone kind of is seeing the disagreement and things like what does a community do if there's sexual assault or something in it? If you have 39 people living together, if you just think of the statistics, the chances that one of these things happens is higher. It's just a numbers game. The chances of having a mental break in the community, statistically, you will have one every X number of years, just because of the math of how often mental breaks happen. And so I think it's actually been a great forcing point for us to actually find alternative solutions and to say, like, do we want our community to rely on the prison system, to rely on police? Or like, wouldn't it be amazing if we had something that was value aligned, that we could make our own solution, our own kind of thing to turn to when things go wrong? And I think alternative justice has started to kind of like brainstorm around that. Like, what does it look like to have restorative justice and to have alternatives when there's sexual assault or harm in our communities? When we know the people who did it, right? Like,
well, yeah,
what does a solution look like that isn't just making a blacklist?
right, right. And there's not the option of, well, let's just forget that they're a human, and now they're excluded from all active. Because again, I think that to me has been one of the most fascinating windows into humanity as a whole. And I lived in a, as we joked, non-intentional intentional community in SF myself. And there's a certain amount of realizing that you can't write off every human being that does an objectionable thing. And if you just wind up doing that, you're just creating two different groups of people. And at a certain point,
Right.
70% of people are excluded for being horrible human beings. Like, you've not done humanity much of a service. And so it's a really powerful window into having to deal with very complex issues that I think a lot of people find it very easy to turn into a black and white, when really there's like a whole bunch more gray, that if we're not willing to really like come in touch with and come in contact with and deal with the icky stuff, then you're also not taking a step forward. You're not helping much. And yeah, it's really impressive to see what you guys do day in and day out, just as like you were saying, existing in the way that you guys exist is a radical enough concept at times. And it's admirable to see human beings step up and show like the best version of themselves, even when human beings aren't being the best version of themselves. And so I tip my hat to you.
Yeah.
It's really impressive stuff.
Yeah.
And I know that a lot of people watching are going to be fascinated by a lot of what they just heard. Is there anything else that you want to share? Any projects that you have coming forward that you're really excited about? Things about this experience maybe through this period that have like been unique to co-op living, as living in a house with 2 or 3 other people?
Oh boy. I've been in co-op living for like 6 or so years now, so it's hard to think of um hard to think of what it would be otherwise. Yeah, I would say it's been very different in the coronavirus response. There's openings in a lot of co-ops, and that's still an option. There's still people actually wanting now to go into communal living because you're actually quarantined with more people, which is kind of great in a sense. Like, there's 12 of us, so we threw a dance party, and there was like, we didn't have to Zoom anyone in.
Yeah. Imagine that. Real human.
Yeah. And the houses have been extremely different in the way that they, I think, handle this. Like, some of them have just like super like this, you enter the house and you're in this zone and you sanitize your phone and then you do this. And some of the houses have been more lenient. I think it's led most, at least Embassy used to never have meetings. Now we have like weekly meetings. It's led to a lot more needing to now we do need consensus on something that normally we wouldn't have, because risk can be transferred, and trust isn't transitive. So even if I like trust someone that I want to hug, someone else doesn't. So like, how do we bridge that? But I would say in general, we're seeing some like really great community organizing from a lot of the co-ops. I think a lot of people jump to think about the things that are harder with communal living. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, I'd have to coordinate with all these more people or be exposed to more people. Well, I also like have only grocery shopped once because other people can go and we can just do it in greater quantities. And, you know, we now here we share family dinner every night, and I cook maybe once a week, but I share a dinner with friends every night. And to your point of like, you know, there's this like best version of ourselves that are the values that like in a cold state we choose for ourselves. I think it's easier to abandon those in times of stress. I have found myself being irrational or acting in ways that are not as value aligned in times of stress, and living with people who know your values, who can say like, hey, wait, time out, like remember you used to like think about these things, and actually like having accountability for me has been one of the best parts of communal living, is actually having people who live with me, who know me, who like when I'm stressed out can say like, I know you really want to just, you know, tell that person to like F off, but like you can't. And in 5 weeks, you'll be happy that you didn't. So like, how about I mediate a conversation?
Wow.
So I think there's some great bonuses to going through these stressful times in the context of communal living. And it's also a lot more miscommunication and a lot more conversations. And I would say one thing that helps is like, I think with all houses, you kind of decide like at Embassy, we have cleaners because people don't want to have arguments over cleaning. We don't want to have a lot of meetings. Most communities meetings are about like the dish, you know, the dishwasher. So we decided to just pay for cleaners, which is kind of a cop out. But I would say it's going to be kind of similar to how you choose whether or not to live in a house based on like how much you care about cleanliness, how much people care about corona preppedness. Mm-hmm. There's houses all along the spectrum in terms of how much they're doing and how much they care. And I think there's just going to be some rejigging of people as like a new axis of like decision making has been added. Yeah,
for sure.
Some have gotten backyard chickens, I heard. So I think some of them are really beefing up. Yeah.
I'm envious of that. Wow. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Well, this has been fantastic, and I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to talk to me.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people are going to be fascinated by a lot of what we just talked about, and then I also know a lot of people in San Francisco are going to be listening and just like, yeah, that all sounds like a Tuesday to me, and like, yeah, it's really nice to have again just some perspective in this moment of all the best that humanity can bring to the table sometimes, and how it takes a little bit of work, but you know, community life is a doable thing that is is worthy of being attempted.
Yeah, and I'll send you the link. We have that centralized sheet of all the houses with openings. Yeah. So
awesome. Definitely send me that. I'll pump that out there and I'll put links for that. Yeah, anybody watching, I can attest. I've been to a handful of co-ops, and not only have I never had a bad time, I generally feel like, should I just move in? I feel like I should move in. I probably should just move in. So yeah, I recommend everybody check them out. Well, thanks, Andrea.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah.
I'll see you soon.
Have a good Thursday.
Thanks, you too. Have a good rest of your day.